Welcome to In the Fire, a podcast for the young families of Chapelgate Presbyterian Church. Marriage and parenting are a wonderful blessing and are extremely rewarding, but they're also really hard and can leave us feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and defeated. That's exactly why we started this podcast, to help families see how the gospel injects encouragement, comfort, and hope into the daily grind of our lives, and to remind you that you're never alone in the struggle. There is another In the Fire.
Hello, welcome to In the Fire. My name is Rob Gicking. I'm the Director of Young Family Ministries here at Chapelgate Church, and I'm joined today by a trio of Chapelgate employees, Frick and Amy Frierson and Lydia Radcliffe. The relationship dynamics in this podcast are sure to be a doozy, but before we do that, Frick, why don't you get us started? We'll go around the horn, introduce yourselves, tell the listener who you are, where you work, what you do, and about your involvement at Chapelgate.
All right. Thank you, Rob. I'm Frick Frierson. We, as a family, have been at Chapelgate Church now for 23 years. And I've been at the academy for 23 years. I'm the assistant principal, assistant head of school, also the basketball coach. And we moved here to come alongside our family. Amy had a sister who had MS, and that's what brought us up here 23 years ago. We've been here ever since.
Great. Thank you. And since he mentioned you by name, Amy, why don't you go ahead and tell us who you are?
All righty. I'm Amy Frierson, and I'm married to Frick Frierson. And I worked at the academy for 10 years doing all kinds of different jobs. My actual degree is in exercise science, but I've taught preschool. I've worked with the international students. I work with the used clothing closet wherever they need me. I just jump in and do what's needed.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for being here. And Lydia, introduce yourself and how you know these lovely folks.
My name is Lydia Radcliffe, and these are my parents. So my maiden name is Frierson. But yeah, I attended Chapelgate Academy and went and played soccer at Charleston Southern University and coached soccer at the University of Maryland. And now I've been back, I guess this is my fourth, maybe fifth year. And I coach women's soccer. I'm assistant athletic director with the school and communications coordinator with the church.
Yeah. So the common theme here is both family and Chapelgate Academy, but also just a slew of multi-talented utility fielding people on this episode. So I can tell you guys, our church is so grateful for you. The school is grateful for you. And I'm grateful that you're taking some time to be here with us today and share a little bit of your story. Now, I've asked this particular group here because we're going to be talking today about discipline and specifically, as we as parents try to raise our kids, that's something that we're going to come up against unless you have a perfect child. And as history shows, there was only ever one of those. So the rest of us have to sort of live in the midst of having, little sinners for children. So we're going to dive into that. But before we do, as always, here comes the hard hitting question of the day. We'll go around the horn again. It'll go Frick, Amy, Lydia. What non-traditional sport would you like to play professionally? What non-traditional sport of the following would you like to play professionally? Your options: Foursquare, bicycle jousting, parkour, geocaching. All right. So Foursquare, bike jousting, parkour, and geocaching. And if someone else claims it, that's off the table. So Frick, you get to go first. Of those four, which one do you like?
That's an easy one for me. When I was in middle school, we used to have PE units playing Foursquare. I loved Foursquare. That was a great game.
That's not fair. That's the only one I can do too. Foursquare.
Hey, you better figure out how to joust on a bike. I don't know what to tell you.
I'll pick geocaching. I'll pick geocaching. Yeah.
All right. And for those of you at home who might not know what geocaching is, I was homeschooled, so I learned what it was very quickly. That's not a knock. It's just a fact. All right. But literally you take a little GPS like a TomTom and you go out in the woods and someone has hidden something at a particular coordinate, and you go and you find it. And sometimes it's really exciting. Like it could be like an old army man. And other times it's like an outdated, stale piece of like burrito. I don't know. The idea is that when you find it, you leave it there. So to call it a sport it's a stretch, but I like it. It's a good pick. So now, Lydia, bike jousting or parkour?
I think I'm going to go with bike jousting. I was going to say geocaching, but since that's taken, we'll go bike jousting.
Wow. That leaves me parkour, which of all the things on this list I would be most definitely worst at. My career would be short and very unrememberable. So anyway, all right. So let's start with you, Frick and Amy. Talk to us a little bit about this thing of discipline in the life of a Christian. Maybe we can start there, just like generally speaking, with discipline in the life of a Christian. Is this a good thing? How do we reconcile discipline with grace, right? We're called to be gracious. How do you reconcile those things?
Well, I'll jump in there, I guess. Although I will say this about the homeschool real quick. We homeschooled our kids, and we must have missed the geocache thing because
geocaching. Our kids are a little bit older than Rob, I think. Not Lydia, but geocaching was just coming along towards the end of that. But that was why I picked it, because I knew about it from being a homeschool mom.
But yeah, with the discipline question, the first thought there for me is the fruit of the Spirit. Self-control is, we as parents and Christians in general need to embody that. That's one of the fruits of the Spirit, that we can discipline ourselves, that we don't need outside, sources to do that. And it all stems out of a relationship with the Heavenly Father. So, I mean, to me, that's it in a nutshell. Our discipline comes out of a relationship. It comes out of a relationship with the Heavenly Father. And as a parent, as a father, I'm the mirror of that, down the line with my own kids. That's my first reaction to that question.
That's great. Amy, what about you?
I totally agree with what he said. I would just say when we had littles, our kids were 4 and 4 years. So I was overwhelmed initially with discipline when they all started showing their original sins. And Frick being in education and just having a really great grasp on discipline, he gave me a lot of little tools that were incredibly helpful. And I still use them when I'm working in a classroom or with Sunday school or wherever. It's pretty amazing and I don't know if he's going to share some of that today, but.
Well, we certainly hope you will. Yeah. I think that's really interesting what you said, Amy, about feeling overwhelmed by discipline. I think that's a feeling a lot of our young families can relate to. I know that I certainly can, because it shows so quickly, right? I mean, it shows as soon as they can start crawling, right? Sometimes even before that, but as soon as they can crawl, what do they always want to touch? They want to touch outlets. They want to touch things they can't touch. And it doesn't matter how many times you say no and physically pick your child up and move them away. And again, that's for their benefit. You stick your finger in an outlet, you're a sad child, like that's a bad thing. But kids will go right back to what you just took them away from. There's something in us from a very young age that kind of doesn't want to follow a system. And we would call that original sin or total depravity or just like human nature. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but we definitely see that it's there. It's true. And I think that's where discipline comes in. I think through Proverbs has a lot to say about discipline, specifically from a parent to a child. But one of the passages in Proverbs 29:17 says, discipline your son and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart. There's this idea that discipline really is, like you said, Frick, it's relational, right? And as we grow and we mature, certainly we develop, the fruit of the Spirit of self-discipline, but there's a sense which lifelong here on earth, we fall under the discipline, which is loving, of our Heavenly Father. And so having that sort of as the backdrop, I guess I would ask this, as you guys parented, and Lydia, we'll kind of follow up with you after this, but like, as you guys parented your kids when they were young, did you see a difference between discipline and punishment?
Yeah. So, I mean, and also I would throw in here too, you have the Heavenly Father as our example. And you mentioned the Hebrews 12 passage where the Father loves whom he disciplines. So, motivation, again, talking about relationship. But in our situation, it's tough because you have a sinner disciplining a sinner. And that's a real factor. And that's part of the equation. That makes it even harder. Is that's what's going on for us. And Amy sort of talked about this because it was very helpful for me. I was old. We're both the youngest of 6 kids. We both grew up in Christian homes, so we had good examples of Christian parenting. We had our own parents to reflect on. We had older brothers and sisters, and we were around them all the time. So we had some really good examples. And then being in education, you learn supposedly how to discipline the right way. And then also, I had been in schools for a while. I was older when we had kids. I was 30 when we had our first kid. So all that stuff is important background for what worked for us. I'm not a single parent. I don't have a blended family. There's all kinds of things that can impact, your spouse's health. As I mentioned, we moved up here. There's a family member in the home that, requires all these different contexts. But I think, the bottom line is the relational piece of it. And as far as, the consequence and the discipline and the punishment part of it, I think sometimes we can put pressure on ourselves as a parent and even as a teacher that you have to deliver some consequence when your child or your student doesn't do the right thing. If it's relational, really my humble opinion, really all that needs to happen is conversation. And from the conversation, from there, you may determine that something more is needed, or maybe there's some reconciliation that needs to happen, or restitution if something was, the child broke something, those kind of things. But I think the context of where you're operating from is something to consider too as a parent when you have that, but especially knowing that as a Christian, I'm a fallen person too. And that, those are I would call that context for disciplining.
Oh, and I might follow up on that. I think on raising a sinner is the most incredible way you can ever teach your kids about Jesus, is the fact that you're constantly sinning and asking for forgiveness. And they see the Christian life as a young, I had to ask my kids for forgiveness as soon as they could understand that I lost my temper. Whatever the thing was, it's a constant relational thing. And I think that is one of the, I know Lydia's got words to say, but I think that's a way your kids see Jesus in you, is when you're living out that relationship and your own sinful, you're not perfect, and they know that too.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I like what you both said. You're sinners, right? Parenting sinners. And let's come back to that in a second. I mean, Lydia, what was your experience, I guess, growing up in a house with believing parents who did lovingly discipline you?
Yeah, it's actually so crazy because I was thinking through the questions you sent, and the biggest thing I was going to say is with kids I coach and even my friends growing up, like, I wanted to do the right thing because I loved my parents, not because they were going to buy me something or told me like, okay, if you do this, you get ice cream, or, if you, whatever, you get this. It was like, I wanted to do the right thing because they showed me in their lives that that's what we do. Like, you don't get a reward to do the right thing. That's just, we should just do that because that's what we're called to do, to live a life for Jesus. So it's funny that, I guess they did a good job because we all came back to that same conclusion. But yeah, just the relationship. I think that my parents did a great job of showing us what the Christian life looked like, just being, monkey see, monkey do. I mean, we would do what our parents did. And so, I remember seeing them reading their Bibles by themselves, praying, loving each other, loving us, like playing with us, spending time with us, asking forgiveness, all those things. So then when you grow up, it's like you do what you see. And I see that with kids I train and coach like all the time, and like bad habits that they've learned from their parents, things they say that you're like, oh man, where did you get that from? And probably their parents. I don't know if that answers the question fully, but it was really great. And I didn't realize how rare it was, I think, fully until I got to college. And I just saw the hatred that some of my friends had for their parents and how excited they were to be out of their house and have their own freedom. And I was sitting there like, wow, I want to go home. I love how our house was and still is like just a safe place. And I've never had like bad feelings of there. It's like, I want to be at our house. We want to all be together. It's like, that's, the ultimate, just such a great time together.
Yeah, I like that. I think what's interesting is it seems, right, and I'm going to use that's a dangerous word, seem, but it seems a little bit like we're trending in a direction culturally that says, it's almost like bad to discipline. That discipline, telling your child that they're wrong, telling your child that they they're not perfect and they're not the most wonderful thing ever. Like you're a bad parent if you don't do those things. And yet there's a sense in which it seems, Lydia, like your experience growing up was that you actually felt safer, that it instilled a greater peace, a less anxiety, because you were in a household where, that discipline, which comes from love, produced in you love. I mean, it sounds to me like what you're saying is like, yeah, I didn't do it for the lollipop. I did it for a different reward. That reward was knowing that your parents loved you and that you loved them. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is so interesting seeing like, we might talk about this later more, but the kids I coach, they want this, oh, I did this. Don't I get something now? This like immediate gratification type thing. And, it is, even when I'm coaching them, I'm not a parent, so I can only imagine, but it is easy to, when they're like frustrated or upset, to just be like, okay, well, if you do this, you're going to get this. But I think another thing that my parents did a good job of is they let us mess up and they let us fail, and we had to deal with it and talk about it and what that meant. So then going through, Division I athletics, that taught me a lot about that. But knowing that sometimes just because you do the right thing, it doesn't mean it's always going to work out for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Frick.
Oh, sorry. I'm thinking out loud here a little bit, but by the time we had kids, I had worked I taught school in a psychiatric hospital, and I taught school in the juvenile justice system. And then we had kids, and then I went to the public school, and we were homeschooling our own kids. And, now I'm at a Christian school. And so there was a lot of that, behavior management kind of stuff, which is good. I mean, I use it to this day, but there's a deeper level to that. And so when you think about discipline versus punishment, the word disciple from a Christian point of view, that's sort of really what you're doing when you're disciplining. It's not meting out consequences. You're discipling your kid, just like you're a disciple of Christ and being discipled by the Lord. You're hopefully trying to disciple your student or your child. And the passage that comes to mind is Deuteronomy 6, where as you go, you're doing life with your kid. And that was one of the things that I think I learned as a teacher is we just talk to our kids about whatever. You don't have to have the talk, or when do I talk about drugs, or when do I talk about this, or you're always talking. And again, it just gets back to the relational part of it. I'm always talking about life. I see something on the corner in our neighborhood, we'll talk about that. And it really doesn't matter what age they are. Of course, the conversation will be age appropriate, but the topic can be talked about really at any age. And coaching, there's this phrase, transactional coaching versus transformational coaching. And transactional coaching is kind of what Lydia's talking about. So as a parent, you want it to be transformational, not this business deal, transactional. Like I'll give you a scholarship in sports if you play soccer for me. What transformational is, the sport might be where we do life, but we're going to do life and learn from it and develop character out of it, if that makes sense.
Sort of going back to a little bit what Lyd said, the other thing with that same thing is, I think it's, if as a parent early on, if you, for me, I mean, I remember having this adjustment in my mind that I had to actually think about that the kids weren't the center of the household. And that is like it's a tricky thing as a mom or a dad, because your life totally revolves around them. It doesn't mean you don't have life revolve around them, but that you're constantly, the children are a part of this family that's already existing. And it's, Jesus is the center. Mommy and daddy's relationship is the center. And then the kids are part of that. And I think that's a worldview that kind of leads into all of that too. But I do remember as a young mom actually having to make myself think that way almost on a daily basis.
Let's go back to the sinner, like sinful parent, right? I mean, I appreciate you guys. You're really sharing your struggles. And I think on one hand, that's really life-giving, right? Because it helps me know that I'm not alone. But at the same time, I think there can be a temptation to maybe look at your child and look at yourself and go, well, you know, I struggled with XYZ when I was their age. So who am I to tell them to tell them they can't do XYZ? I struggle with it too. What would you say to that parent who's maybe looking at their own life and going, you know, well, when I was that age, I was the same way. So how can I hold my child to a different standard than I lived out at their age?
I mean, that's a great conversation. Yeah. That's a life lesson. And you share that story, age appropriate, of course, but you share that story with them and say, wow, if anything, I understand you on this situation. I couldn't beat that by myself. I struggle with this myself. I still struggle with this today. Let's pray about it. Let's talk about it. What's the Bible have to say about it? But we still can't. You or I have got to get away from that. Together, we're going to beat this. Together, we're going to work together through this. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. That can be a freeing thing. I have the freedom to be honest with my kid about that. I think that'd be my thought there. And I'll throw this in there too. Kids' success is not the definer of your parenting. And that's important to remember too, I think. It's not a performance. You're just called to build a relationship. If your kid doesn't make straight A's, if your kid doesn't get first seat cello or whatever it is, that's okay. The goal is not to raise some superstar person. Your goal is to raise a person as a relationship with Christ. And when they leave your house, they have the fruit of the Spirit. Self-discipline. They have the fruit of the Spirit, self-control. And it may not even happen when they leave the house. But that's not necessarily a reflection on your parenting. And I think, as for me, as a younger dad, you can think, why isn't this working? Because this is what they said was going to work when you raised your kid. And that's a lie, and it's not true. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent if everything's not falling the way it's supposed to fall. We live in a fallen world. That's life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think what you said two things there that I think are really noteworthy for as a young dad. It's, my goal is not to raise superstar, successful, athletic, intelligent, like if our children turn out that way, fantastic. Of course, we want that for them. We want what's best for them. But at the end of the day, like my goal as a Christian is that I would, like you said in Deuteronomy, as I go, that I'd be imparting, the love of God to the best of my ability to my children. And part of that obviously it's going to be discipline. It's going to be helping them see the way they should go so that when they're older, they do not depart from it. So that they could see what it looks like day in and day out to have the love of Christ be a steady presence in their life. I think that was really, really good. Amy, I want to talk to you a little bit about as a young mom, how did you, I guess, what were some of those moments, or what were some of those things that you sort of picked up on that were, effective means of helping your children see the love of God when they had done something wrong?
So again, I just said that when initially that was a struggle for me, especially when all of a sudden the fourth one was when our fourth child, we were living in Columbia, South Carolina. And when our fourth child was born, all four of our kids were born there. And my parents, my dad was a pastor, and my parents had been very helpful. They were the only grandchildren in the same town. They decided to move up to Maryland to help my sister. And that initial year was really tough for me when Frick would go to work, which was every day. So that was a problem. But one of the things, he kind of coined this phrase that we used called the 5 Ps, and wrote it down for me and gave me, but it doesn't really matter what the Ps are. And I don't know if he might talk about that. But the thing that it did was it helped me get, when we were in a situation where I might lose my temper or get angry, it gave me a little bit of a robotic way to be where I was consistent, where I could be consistent and talk through this little 5 Ps. And sometimes it was a great talk and sometimes it was a terrible talk. It didn't really matter. It was just that I was doing the same thing every time. And your kids start to they respond to that. Kids just thrive on consistency and routine. And I mean, and I think that's biblical. I can't give you the Bible verse, but I know Fricker, you can pull it out. You're a preacher, you can pull it out. But like just those things, that really helped me so much. And then when we moved to Maryland, we helped raise my nephew, and he had a lot of struggles just being from a house where his mother was chronically ill. And a lot of that was so helpful for him too, I think.
Yeah, that was one thing that when I was thinking through the questions of like just my childhood and growing up, in that consistency was like huge. It wasn't ever like, how am I going to get punished? Like I could tell you, like, if I did this, I would probably get this. And then we would pray together and cry together and it would all be good. And our family still operates like, poor John, my husband, he had to come into this, but like, if there's an issue, like, boom, we work through it, like right there in front of everyone. It's crazy, but it's consistent and it hasn't changed. And I think that builds that security and even just the consistency of my dad's schedule. Like I can remember, like, he's going to get home and we're going to play together, and then we're going to do a devotional at dinner, and we're going to go to bed and read the Bible before bed, and all the different things, like Sunday mornings or Sunday nights, we're going to share what we learned in Sunday school. Like all of those things built that trust, I think, underlying, and just the consistency was so key to even now. I mean, I would say that I'm very close with both my parents and know that they would do anything for me. So I think that just the little things that build up the trust are there.
Yeah. And I'm just even like, I'm investigating, right? I'm listening to you all share with almost like an investigator's mind. And I'm picking up on this huge theme that discipline without love is harshness. But love that comes from the gospel will produce loving discipline that seeks to correct when wrong, but to encourage when right. And it sounds to me like that really was a little bit of that MO for you guys moving forward. And I got to ask, Frick, what on earth are the 5 Ps?
Wait, can I say one thing before he says the 5 Ps?
Yeah.
Well, just going back to what Lyd said, and she kind of talked about this, but we fight like she was just kind of, it's not like but I think the difference is right away we work through it. It's nothing, there's no going to bed with anger, and there's no, it's not that there's this perfect, everybody gets along great and the siblings fight.
You might feel awkward if you first get into it, because you're like, oh wow, like they just had a fight and they're fixing it right now in front of everyone. But like it just happens and everybody makes up and then we just move on.
So it's, yeah, I guess that's what I was going to say, but go ahead. Mr. Frierson? What are the 5
yeah.
P's?
The 5 P's. I know I stole that somewhere, and then I Christianized it a little bit. But the 5 P's was when the child does something, and I still do it. I do discipline at the school, and every school I've ever been at, it's kind of been my world. But the first, it allows you to gather yourself. It allows you don't have to say anything. You're just asking questions. The 5 P's are 5 question words, and it allows you to control your temper. It just allows you to distance yourself for a second. But the first one is you pull them aside. There's a problem. Maybe they had a fight with their brother. You pull them aside, away from everybody else. Might go to a different room, whatever. And just ask, what's the problem? Why am I talking? At school now, I say all the time, why did I call you over here? Or if they got sent out of class, why did they send you here? What's the problem? Let them do the talking. And then I would not, the only reason I use this word is because it starts with a P, but what's the punishment? Really is a better word is what's the consequence? Because you can ask them, what's the consequence? The consequence, the best ones are natural consequences. So if they can see that, they're going to say that, I lost trust, or I lost my temper, or I broke something, whatever it is. So the first piece, what's the problem? The second one is what's the punishment, / consequence. And then what's a potential solution? So I just ask, what do you need to do? Well, I need to apologize for little kids. I need to apologize to my brother for smacking upside the head or whatever it was. And then prepare for reentry. You just talk about what are we getting ready to leave here? What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? We want it to be a good apology. So how, or whatever it's going to be. Prepare for reentry is the 4th one. And then you have a prayer with them. And then we're on our merry way. So you go those 5 P's, and you may not end up saying it. They may a lot of times end up solving the problem themselves, because it's pretty basic questions. You lost your temper, you punched him, you do apologize. And an apology may be the consequence. You don't necessarily need to spank them. Again, if they broke something, then the consequence may be that they need to fix. Does that make sense? But those are the famous 5 P's.
Yeah, that's great. So just to review, what's the problem? What's the punishment? You talked about that. That could be a C. That could be a hidden P there. Consequence, the potential solution, the preparing for reentry, and a prayer. I think that is fabulous. And I love the example you give too, because oftentimes we look at discipline exclusively from a punitive standpoint, right? Like you said, like, okay, maybe one child hit another child. And so there's this like, I know that my listeners, like, they know exactly what to talk about. You watched it happen. You're like, you just had a freak out moment in your brain where you're like, oh my gosh, that was evil. Like, that was an evil thing my child just did. And they hit their sibling, like, oh, and you have this like burning fire of justice. You want to bring down wrath upon your child, but then you start to like, as an adult, you start to like, in the moment, you like rationalize, you're like, so am I about to teach my child not to hit his brother by hitting my child? This doesn't make any sense. So I love that there is a beautiful process there. The problem, the punishment, the potential solution, preparing for reentry, and prayer. I also love that it's not without Jesus. To not pray. For you as a parent not to be praying, you're missing out. But for you not to pray with your child in the midst of their fallenness, in the midst of their sin, you guys, when you do that, Lydia, I want to hear from you, like, having been a recipient, a beneficiary of the 5 P's process, like, how did that change your perspective of God, the Heavenly Father, that even when you failed, prayer was right there? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think I subconsciously do that with kids I train too. Obviously I can't pray with them all the time, but a lot of times they, talk it out. But I learned so much about my walk with Jesus and life through sports. And I think discipline is such a big part of sports. And so I feel like the most pressing, like, understanding of all of that I would translate it to soccer for me. And, like even if I was frustrated after a game or something, my dad would say, 15-minute rule. And I'd vent it out, get all my anger out, and then we'd pray about it. And then okay, look on to the next, like, what's next? How can I learn from this? Like, so even in sports, we were learning a lot about like the discipline piece, or just like how life doesn't work out. But I mean, yeah, I think for me, my dad has always been an example of like prayer is such a constant thing throughout the day. Like he would say, whenever you hear the bell ring at school, like say a prayer, like things like that. So prayer was so implemented in our life. And like I said, if I was in trouble, I knew what was going to happen. So I knew we were going to pray about it at the end. And so, I mean, not that it wasn't like I wasn't scared to get in trouble. Of course, I didn't want to get in trouble, but I also knew my parents loved me, because it didn't end with this like unresolved tension. We prayed together and we moved on and we moved forward. And so I think, yeah, it was just really helpful to understand that the Lord disciplines us, but it doesn't necessarily mean everything's over and we can't have that relationship anymore.
Yeah, I'm like literally thinking of Hebrews 12 when you said that, Lydia. Verse 11 is, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who've been trained by it. Frick, Amy, Lydia, thank you guys so much for sharing your story, your hearts with us. I know that for me as a young dad, regardless of whether anybody else listens to this or not, I have benefited greatly. And, I do think these 5 Ps are great. I think that discipline often falls into a category of something you either do or don't do. But I really appreciate that, actually, even more than I was hoping for today. I think what you've painted for us is a vision of biblical parenthood that seeks to instill love to our children and recognizes that part of love is going to be helping them see that even when they make mistakes, even when they're wrong, even when they sin, God still loves them, and there may still be consequences. And we can live in a world for now where both are true. And we don't have to live where one is true and not the other. And so thank you guys so much for your time, for being here, for sharing your stories. Lydia, thank you for, we'll get the real scoop on another episode, the inside track on Lydia's childhood. But no, seriously, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
As always, thank you so much for listening to In the Fire. We are so glad you've chosen to spend the past half hour with us. If you want to learn more about Chapelgate, or you have questions about the ministries we have, or how you can connect as a young family, please reach out. My contact info is in the show notes below. And just as a closing thought, I spoke with Frick, Amy, and Lydia a little more after the interview had ended. And Frick really wanted me to stress this, and I think it's so nice of him to remind us of this, is that those 5 Ps and things that they've shared today is what's worked for their family. And part of the difficulty of moving forward as a parent is to learn your children and what works for you and your family dynamic. And I think we all would feel that the main thing to remember here is this: there are no perfect parents. There are no perfect kids, but there is a perfect Jesus, and he loves you perfectly. And so as you continue on in this wonderful journey, look for ways that you can practically move forward into improving your parenting, improving your marriage, but understand that what worked for one person might work for you and it might not. And in either case, we hope you know that we love you and we're here for you. And if we can be an encouragement in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. Until then, thanks for joining us in the fire. We'll see you next week.